Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Sunday service today. Before we do get started on our Dharma talk, please join me in invoking our teacher's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. So today's Dharma talk will be about temple etiquette and some do's and don'ts for when visiting temples. I thought since we are kind of somewhat nearing the end of completing our new shrine, I thought it'd be an appropriate time to bring some of those etiquettes and do's and don'ts up before then, so that way for any existing members that may have forgotten some etiquettes, or for new guests and members that come, hopefully I'll give you some idea of what to do. That way we feel a little bit more comfortable and we can ask questions and kind of have an idea of what is what and why. As you see, we're also getting ready for our Ulambana celebration next Sunday. So with that said, next Sunday there will not be a Sunday service at 12:30. It will just be the Ulambana celebration at 10 a.m., which we will be live streaming through Facebook only. We'll upload the video later on to YouTube, but it's just easier for us just to do it via Facebook. There's less technology involved. So join us next Sunday, 10 a.m. for our Ulambana celebration. Since the celebration next week will be mostly in Vietnamese, the chanting part, we'll chant today the Ulambana Sutra in English. So I've uploaded the sutra part only to our website. I've also included the link in the YouTube description. I just did it a few minutes ago, so you may have to refresh the list there in order to get the link, or just visit our website at BuddhistTempleSA.org. You can also find the link of the sutra there, and there's also a link of the etiquette list that I'm going to go over today as well. Okay, so we'll get started. So I've made this list quite some time ago as far as our etiquette list is concerned, but I've broken it into 3 categories. So I've compiled it into the temple or holy place etiquette, etiquette for sacred objects, and etiquette towards monks and nuns and monastics in general. So a lot of these are really just mostly courtesy and common sense for the most part. You'd pretty much react and do the same things you would at a church or any other holy place. There's really not much difference for the most part. I think the only main difference would be some of the rituals we may do, whether it's like lighting the incense or the candles or anything like that, or addressing the monks and nuns, or interacting with the monks and nuns. I think that would be only the main difference we would see between, Buddhist temples and a Christian church or a synagogue or a mosque, anything like that. So it's nothing too crazy. Again, mostly it's just kind of common courtesy. There are a lot of other traditional etiquettes and kind of do's and don'ts, but those are mostly cultural traditions that may have come from some of the Eastern Asian countries. So you'd see those a little bit more strictly applied in like the Theravada temples, so the Thai temples, or the Cambodian or Sri Lankan temples. Anywhere where Theravada Buddhism is practiced, usually since they're kind of the more orthodox tradition, a lot of the cultural traditions have also kind of stayed with the temple. And so you'll see a little bit more stricter rules there than you would see in most other Mahayana temples. And of course, we do have to adopt to our own cultural etiquette as well. But even with that, like I mentioned, it's really just mostly common courtesy for the majority of these things on this list. So it's nothing too crazy. It's really just about respecting the place, respecting the objects, and respecting the people. So as long as you are respectable in that sense, then you'd pretty much be doing everything right, right? We don't expect anybody to come in and know everything or know it all or how to do things. And by no means do we typically do people do anything to really offend us or offend the members. There's really nothing you can do to offend us for the most part, right? It's if you did, then that would be kind of pushing our ego there a little bit, which we try to kind of eliminate in a way, right? But mostly everyone is, of course, invited. Everyone's welcome. There have been very, very, very few instances, two, I think, in the last almost 10 years that I've been here, that we would ever have to ask people to leave, whether it's because of what they're wearing, was one instance, and the other instance was just kind of the attitude and really the negativity that they were bringing. So those are the only times where I've ever had to ask anyone to leave. Otherwise, because of that, anybody new coming in, we don't expect you to know how to act or how to be. So really, we would welcome you. If there would have been something quite noticeable that we would have to address, then we would address it with you privately to the side. But otherwise, we typically wouldn't make a big deal. I always just tell people, if they email us or they make any comments online about, what to wear or what to bring or anything like that, I typically just reply, wear something comfortable but something respectable, right? You're going to a temple, you're going to a church, so you want to dress respectfully. So we do address some of the clothing requirements here on this list, but I do try to emphasize the comfort level of what you would wear. I'm not saying you need to wear shorts or leggings or yoga pants, because don't. But if you do choose to sit on the floor, for instance, then of course you do want to be comfortable to be sitting on the floor. Otherwise, everyone is also welcome to sit on the chairs or some of the benches that we have. So let's go into the list. So if you have the list up, you can definitely follow along. So I'm going to go through some of these, read them out to you, and then we'll kind of go over them a little bit. So for the temple and holy place etiquette, we have when entering a temple, it is respectful to make prostrations and bow. When entering a shrine room or a dharma hall, remove your shoes and hat before entering, which again, the shoes part is probably something that's not as common in the West, right? When you get to a church or anywhere else, you don't typically remove shoes. The only other religious place where shoes are typically removed is in Islamic mosques, right? They remove their shoes before entering. So at Buddhist temple, it's pretty much the same thing. The only exception to that is if you go to a temple where their shrine is an open space, as in there's no doors to where the shrine area is and the big statues. That is it's probably one of the only places where you can kind of walk through the threshold with your shoes on. But even then, it's still respectable to remove your shoes. But for our temple, for instance, we do remove our shoes before entering. And outside our door, we have little shoe cubbies, basically, where you can place your shoes on. So just remove your shoes. If you have a hat on, remove your hat. Just be respectful when you're entering. And usually also when you enter the shrine, if you're a member, if you're a Buddhist, if you're spiritual, then of course make prostrations, make a bow. Typically once entering the shrine room, once you've passed through the door, you can simply make a half a bow to the hall, to the shrine, before completely entering and making yourself comfortable. The third item on here is it's common to circumambulate clockwise at holy or sacred places such as stupas and statues. That is not necessarily done inside of the temples. Usually, if it's outside, so if there's a large statue outside that's on a platform, an altar, we typically go around it clockwise 3 times, and then we'd go in front of the statue and make either prayers or do some chanting or meditate, whatever it may be. A stupa is I guess in the simplest way, it's basically a burial site, right? Typically, it comes in different shapes and sizes, depending on the tradition, depending on what's inside the stupa. Usually it's remains of high teachers or monastics, monks or nuns, which isn't very common in America that you would typically see them. Very few temples I've been to have them. They're quite complicated to make and to have and to house, but we don't have any yet. It's one of my plans to do in the future for our teacher. Next item on here is when lighting a candle or incense, do not blow out the flame with your breath, but rather wave your hand to extinguish it. We don't light candles very often, but we do light incense pretty much for every service and every ceremony that we do. So it's courtesy to either let the incense flame go out on its own, or simply just to kind of, wave air at it to extinguish the flame. Never blow on it. We want to blow our breath into it, or a candle. Simply just wave your hand, or just kind of like shake the incense a little bit. That's typically what I do. Next on here is avoid sneezing, sniffling, blowing your nose, coughing, or clearing your throat too loudly when in a meditation hall, so that you do not disturb others. That's pretty much self-explanatory. We're not saying don't do any of those things. I mean, typically if you have to cough or sneeze or anything else, it's not exactly voluntary, right? You're not doing it on purpose, but you don't want to do it with your mouth open, right? Of course, always cover your mouth, or if you have to, you can get up and leave the room to cough or whatever. And then when a service is beginning or about to begin, avoid talking with others or making too much noise. Instead, be mindful and listen mindfully to the sounds of the bell. So typically, sometimes I have to shush people, but not very often. It's usually our core members that I have to shush sometimes. But typically, once the monastics have entered the room, so once the monks and the nuns have entered, it's indicating that the service is starting or the ceremony is starting. So of course you just want to be mindful of that and to avoid talking or even whispering, right? Just be mindful of what's happening, what's going on, because as soon as the monks and nuns enter and they're in place and the bell has rung, that's indicating that the service or ceremony is officially starting. So of course we want to avoid just being too loud or making too much noise in the background, and just be mindful of the service happening. Never bend over forward with your back toward the shrine or monk or nun. When standing, do so slowly with your head bowed facing the shrine. So that's probably something that's not very common in churches as far as I'm concerned. But usually if we are sitting, for instance, and we want to get up, I don't think I have that on the list. So if we're sitting and we want to get up and leave or something, we typically just rise, do a half bow towards the shrine or toward the monks and nuns, and take a few steps backward, and then kind of turn around and move. If we are not sitting, if we're just around the shrine area or in the temple hall, you want to avoid bending forward and your back towards the shrine, right? You don't want to basically keep your backside towards the shrine, right? You want to be respectful in that sense. And then same way, if you're coming back after you've left, you just want to do a quick short half bow and then sit back down in your place. And then when visiting a temple, going to a teaching, or a meeting with a monk or nun, it is not appropriate to wear revealing clothing. Clothing should be respectable. Pants or shorts and skirts below the knee is acceptable. So again, this just goes back to what I was saying earlier. Just wear respectable clothing when you come to the temple. The temple is still a holy place. It's still a church in a sense. So you want to wear the same thing you would wear to a church, right? You want to go into a church wearing a bikini or wearing something that's too revealing and disrespectful. So the same thing when you want to visit a temple. I do not recommend wearing shorts in any capacity whatsoever. The only time, if we're doing like retreats or bigger services, the only time I would allow people to wear shorts is if we're doing a retreat and we have the sessions when we're doing chores or the cleaning and we're outside, and if it's too hot, then of course we can wear something a little bit more comfortable. But typically inside the temple, we would not allow people to wear shorts. If you are wearing shorts, then of course just make sure they're not short shorts, and then they're at least at knee level or below. So you can wear like capris. Is that what it's called, capris? So you can wear that. You can wear skirts if they're and dresses that are below the knee. Same thing, top side. Nothing too revealing, nothing too what's the word I'm looking for? Nothing too short, right? Typically, you want to wear something that is covering your shoulders. So just try to be respectful. I mean, I can't say more than that. Just to be mindful of where you're going, right? When you're going to a church or when you're going to a temple, you're surrounded by the monastics who have taken certain vows, and so you really have to be respectable to them since you're going to their place of worship. So our second category here is about sacred objects. So books and statues should never be placed on the ground in dirty places or generally where people sit. They should be on a shelf or as high as possible. So for us, we in almost every temple will have little little book desks. I don't know what we call them, but the these little holders, right? That hold up our books when we're doing the chanting. Otherwise, we don't typically place anything on the floor directly, and keep it there, right? And then when we put them away, we usually put them on a little mini table or put them into the shelf. Just anything anywhere that's not on the ground directly. And that goes for any other sacred objects. So any of the statues, typically if you have a statue or an altar at home, your main statue, your Buddha statue, typically, traditionally, it wouldn't be directly on the table. So you would place it on something else. So usually like a little block of some sort, so it's higher than everything else on the altar. Anything with sacred objects. So if you have like any prayer beads or the mala beads, you'd place them like in a special bowl or a special place, in a box or something close up, and everything else. So even like our bells and motaks, they're on the cushion. So anything that's used and regarded as part of the practice or ritual is typically off the ground or off the table, and it's on something. Next, do not point at any sacred object or monk or nun with your index finger. Instead, gesture toward the objects with an open palm. So, you know, it just goes back to me being younger, and my mom would tell me, don't point, right? Don't point. Pointing is not nice. Pointing is not courteous. So it's pretty much the same rule kind of applies here. So if we're pointing to something, you'll see us never point with our finger. We're always with the palm up. So if we're, you know, pointing to the statue or pointing to a certain person or anything else, we're using it with our open palm, and just kind of point it towards it using our palm. Next item is do not step on any sacred objects, including books, papers with sutras or mantras on it, prayer beads, and other sacred objects. So it's kind of the reason why we don't place those stuff on the ground, is because they could potentially be stepped on or sat on intentionally or unintentionally. So that's why we kind of keep them on high places or off the ground directly. And then next is when approaching or using Dharma instruments, bow to it or raise it up to your forehead before and after using them. Since our motak and our bell and all the other instruments that we use is part of our practice, part of the mindfulness practice, the instruments that we use aren't just for the sake of using them or for their sounds. We use them to help us keep our focus to what we're chanting. They help us stay in sync with everyone else that's chanting. They help us, you know, keep our tempo, and also indicates certain places, at least with the drum, or with the bell. So typically if we're hitting the bell, we're doing it at the beginning, sometimes in the middle of things, and towards the end, indicating that it's starting or it's finishing. So since they're used in a practice and used in some sort of ritual, we would typically, if I'm using the bell for instance, we can either, if we're using the big bell, that's in the back here, we could just do like a half bow to it. But if we're using a smaller bell, or if we're sitting, then we would typically just kind of raise it and lower our head up to our forehead before and after using the instrument. And then last item on here is when approaching and bowing to any sacred objects, statues, or monks and nuns, bow and step backward a few steps before turning around. So I kind of mentioned this earlier when we went over getting up slowly. So again, if we are, you know, whenever we're placing incense or anything on the altar, we would do a half bow, place the incense, and then kind of back up a little bit and then bow to it again and move on to the next censer. Or doing the same when we're approaching any of the statues that we're praying at or bowing to, or of course any monks and nuns. Last category here is about monks and nuns, so the monastics of the temple and the monastery. And these are the ones that are typically maybe unique to Buddhism versus, the preachers or the reverends or the priests at churches. So the first item on here is to avoid touching or hugging monks and nuns, especially if they are of the opposite gender. So we do not, monks and nuns in Buddhism, even the community as a whole, we avoid hugging or touching the monks and nuns. So instead of shaking hands, we'll typically just do a half bow, which is healthier, especially now, right, with COVID, and it's a little bit more respectable. And we don't practice hugging either, especially within monastics, since the monks and nuns, we do take vows of celibacy and take other vows that avoid sensual pleasures and desires and stuff like that. So we don't typically hug at all, or even kind of physically interact with opposite genders or with the community members. The next one's kind of already mentioned. When greeting monks and nuns, place your palms together and bow your head. So again, just making a short half bow. And then when addressing a monk or nun that you do not know, address them as venerable or master until you're familiar with what the Sangha calls them. So, so here in our temple, we typically refer to our head monk, our teacher, as teacher. But for the most part, that's reserved for actual temple members to call him teacher, since he is their teacher by taking the refuge and the precepts. So for guests or newcomers, it's more respectable to address our teacher as venerable, and you can address me as Master Quang or as Master. Otherwise, and it's the same thing anywhere else, really. You typically address the monks and nuns as venerable until you know what everybody else would call them, or if they go by something else, you kind of want to figure that out by the temple members or the center members, and just kind of figure out how to address them. Otherwise, if you are unfamiliar or can't remember or anything else, you can just simply refer to the monks and nuns as venerable. And then it is common to stand up when a monk or nun enters the room with your palms together and bowed head, especially if he or she is teaching, which we typically do. So usually when we're having large ceremonies or services, some of the monastics and senior members follow our teacher kind of in a procession through the temple. And when we're doing that, it's customary and it's respectable to rise and kind of bow to them as they're passing you. And the same thing here. So if we're coming for a service and the teacher enters the room, then we would rise and bow to him and wait for the service to begin. And you would typically do that anywhere, especially if it's for service or a Dharma talk or discussion. And that's only appropriate for monastics, for monks and nuns. Next thing on here is when sitting, avoid extending or pointing your feet toward the monk or nun in shrine. So I've seen this sometimes. So if you're sitting here, typically the temple members will be facing the shrine. And so if you're sitting on the ground and you're not accustomed to sitting on the ground, right? Your knees and legs kind of may get a little stressed out and kind of just feel uncomfortable. And so the natural thing to do would be to extend your legs. But we don't want to do that while we're at the temple, especially if you're sitting towards the front or closer to the shrine area or towards the monks and nuns. So avoid extending your legs out. If you have to stretch them out or adjust yourself, feel free to get up and kind of just walk back and forth or into the other room. But you don't want to extend your feet. You don't want to keep your knees up where your feet are pointing to the shrine or the monks and nuns, especially if you don't have a robe on. But if you do have a robe on, and if you do have to, not extend your legs, but if you do have to at least lift your legs up where your knees are up and your feet are pointing out, it's only times appropriate to do that if you are wearing a robe or a dress or something that's long enough to cover your feet. Otherwise, please do avoid extending your feet. Next item here is for serving. Start with the highest or oldest monk or nun first before serving anyone else, which I think is pretty common in most religious traditions and practices. So here, since there's only 3 of us that are monastics, or anywhere else, you want to serve the kind of like the highest ranking monk or nun first. So the eldest, that's not the oldest by age, but the oldest that, in a sense, in Buddhism, the oldest or eldest by years of being ordained. So Um, so even if someone is younger than someone else, but the younger person has been ordained longer than the older person, you would serve the younger person first. So typically we can see this um, by how they're seated. So usually the oldest monks, the highest ranking or most venerable monks will always sit in the front at the beginning and kind of descend by seniority, monastic seniority. And the same thing when we are sitting down for dinner or at the dining hall. It's always the older monks and nuns first and kind of descending to the younger ones towards the end. So since here we only have me, the teacher, and the nun, the teacher is always served first, followed by the nun, and then myself, and then with everyone else. Typically it's the monastics, then the temple members, and then the guests. And then when offering something, do it with both hands, even if it's something small. So if we're serving the monks and nuns, whether it's serving them their bowl of food or a drink, always do it with two hands. It's respectable to do that, even if it's something small, right? Just to open your palms and kind of just give it to them and place them down. It's to be respectable. And then the last item on here is when having a meal with a monk or nun, stop eating while they are speaking to you so that you can be mindful of their teachings. So here, when we would have lunch together after our services, before COVID times, we would always have lunch together after the services, right? And usually the teacher would answer questions, or I would answer questions, or he would kind of extend a little bit on his teachings that he spoke about during the Dharma talk. So if he's just generally speaking, it's okay for us to continue to eat. But if he's speaking to you directly, like if you've asked a question and he's responding to you, then that is a time where it's appropriate for you to place your utensils down and then just simply listen to him and be mindful of the teaching, just to show respect, because you've asked a question and then you're getting an answer, so you want to be respectable and listen and pay attention to him or to anyone else that's answering you while you're eating. So it's respectful and hopefully common sense to stop eating while they're answering you, just to be respectful and mindful of what they're saying, because the answer itself is a teaching, so just be mindful of it. Otherwise, if it's just being generally spoken, or he's continuing on the Dharma talk or anything else, it's appropriate to continue eating, but you still may want to stop eating just to be respectable, but it's not completely necessary. But that is it for our etiquettes. I'm trying to think if there's anything else here we typically do. The only other thing I'd want to probably mention is since the shrine, we typically would have quite a few guests come into the temple, right? And before COVID, when the shrine was open to guests and they would come in, typically myself or a teacher would always, welcome them in, answer any questions they may have, or do some explanation of things, or just kind of talk to them a little bit, no big deal. But since our shrine is now closed, the only guests we have are the guests that kind of walk through the gardens. And one thing I'd like to mention is, in most temples or monasteries, the monks and nuns have a pretty set schedule. We have We have the chores to do, we have chanting services, we have study periods. You know, our whole life basically is pretty much scheduled, and there's very, very few, very little free time outside of our practice. So you may see us outside in the garden, watering the garden, or doing some sort of chores. So do be mindful that we are still in a working period. We're not out there, you know, hanging out. So it's not common for us to kind of host you and kind of give you a tour, since we are on a schedule. But that doesn't mean we won't answer any questions. If you have any questions or anything like that, we will still, of course, interact with you and answer any questions. But we may not just have the time to kind of give you a tour or anything like that. It's also not very common for us to initiate conversation with you either. So we may say hello to you, we may do, you know, bow back if you bow to us, but not in a mean or negative way, but don't expect conversation. So we may hear some comments from people sometimes saying that we're not being friendly, but it's definitely not that. It's just we are in a working period, part of our monastic duties, and having a conversation is interrupting that time period. So it's not something that we're doing to be hurtful or to be mean or to ignore you. We're just doing our job. So if you have a question or a concern or anything else, you typically would have to initiate it, because we will not initiate conversation. So don't feel bad or feel hurt or neglected or forgotten about if we don't have a conversation with you. The least you would get from us is a bow and a hello. And that's pretty common in any temple and monastery, because everyone is on a set schedule. And since here we're pretty small, there's only 3 of us. We have a pretty big land and a lot of things to do with very few people, and that kind of limits our time constraint even further, because we just don't have the manpower to do more work. If we did, then we'd be more open and available for people and for questions and comments. But since we're pretty small, it's a little bit more difficult. So just don't feel bad if you visit us and we don't really have a conversation with you. Let's see. I'm trying to look through some old lists here. Some other items on here I have is, if taking pictures with a statue or with a monk and nun, keep your head below the statue's head, and being on one knee, at least one knee, is respectable. Especially if you're taking pictures with a monk or nun, you typically want to be kneeled down, or at least a little, bowing a little bit next to them, or in front of them. Never stand up with them unless they've asked you to. And it's the same thing with taking pictures at statues. For the most part, all of our statues are pretty large and bigger than us anyway, so there's really no need for us to be kneeling down or sitting down. But if they are at normal size level, then you do want to at least try to be a little bit lower than the statue's head. And some of the other don'ts here is, of course, it's basically about littering. So we don't want to cause any litter at the temple, which includes, just don't placing trash anywhere, don't spit on the ground, or place any text or prayer sheets directly on the floor, or anywhere where people may sit or stand on. And also, do not wear any heavy perfume or cologne when inside the temple or when coming to the temple. because we typically may sit in close proximity. You don't want your perfume or cologne to disturb others, right? Some people may have sensitive smell, sensitive noses, or may not like the scent. So you don't want to wear heavy perfume or cologne. And of course, we don't want to be showing any displays of affection, PDA, in or outside the temple. Otherwise, I think those are the major points that I wanted to discuss. Again, just, it's just about being respectable about the place and about the people that are here, and for the community as a whole. So just treat the temple like you would treat any other holy place or church. Be respectable to the place, be respectable to the grounds, and respectable to the monastics and our members. We always welcome people, regardless if it's your first time or 100th time. We're always, typically whenever senior members during any service or ceremony, if you're new, if it's your first time, if you've never been to a temple, somebody will always be there to answer any questions, and to kind of help direct you as to what to do or what to expect. For the most part, I just tell people to kind of sit back, relax, and observe. You can participate as much or as little as you like if it's your first time. So you don't really put any pressure on anybody to do anything or to act any certain way, besides just being respectable and honoring the place and the people that surround you. So that is it for my Dharma talk. So I've included the link for the Ulambana Sutra that we will chant today together. So the first part of our regular service, up until the Compassion Mantra, we'll chant. So then after the Compassion Mantra, we'll chant the Ulambana Sutra that I've put on our website. And then after that, we'll continue with the last part of our regular service, starting with the Heart Sutra, the Heart of Prajna Paramita Sutra. So if you have our book, feel free to kind of follow along in the book if you need to. The general service is also available online as well on our website if you need to download those texts. That way we can chant the Ulambana Sutra together. So as a reminder, just quickly, that next Sunday at 10 a.m. we will celebrate our Ulambana celebration via Facebook Live. So please visit our Facebook page next Sundays to find that link that goes up, that will go up. And because of that, we will not have regular Sunday service next Sunday at 12:30. So we will meet again the following Sunday at 12:30. And as usual, if you have any comments, concerns, emotional outbursts, feel free to leave them in the comments or send us an email. I typically get back to everybody's email within a day or two for that. So let's go ahead, invoke our teacher's name, and transfer the merit. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. For any positive karma action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings and wish them full enlightenment. forgetfulness and transcend all anxiety and sorrow. Listen, listen, this wonderful sound brings me back to my true home. In gratitude we offer this incense to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas throughout space, and may it be fragrant as earth herself, reflecting our careful efforts, wholehearted mindfulness, and the fruit of understanding slowly ripening. May we and all beings be companions of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. May we awaken from forgetfulness and realize our true home. The incense in the censer now is burning, all the Dharma realm in every place auspicious, clouds appearing, our sincere intention thus fulfilling, as all Buddhas now show their perfect body homage. The incense cloud canopy, Bodhisattva and great Bodhisattvas. Homage to the eternally abiding Buddhas, the supreme Dharma and sagely sung about the Dharma realm and the realm of empty space and 3 periods of time. Homage to the fundamental teacher Shakyamuni Buddha Maitreya, nerd future Buddha Manjushri, great wisdom Bodhisattva universe, great conduct Bodhisattva, all Dharma guarding Deva Bodhisattva, then the magic mountain assembly of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Homage to Amitabha Buddha in the land of ultimate bliss, Avalokiteshvara, great compassion Bodhisattva, great strength Bodhisattva, restore great vow Bodhisattva, and the assembly of great pure sea-like Bodhisattvas. The great compassion mantra with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes on any runs like this. Namo Ratnatrayaya, Namo Arya Avalokiteshvaraya, Bodhisattvaya, Mahasattvaaya, Mahakarunikaya, Hum Sarvapati Sudana Sasya Namaskirpana Manarya Avalokiteshvara. The Dharma body is bringing morning light in concentration. My heart is at peace, a smile is worn on my lips. This is a new day, and I vow to go through it in mindfulness. The sun of wisdom rising, shining in every direction. Noble Sangha, diligently bring your mind into meditation. Namo Shakyamuni Bodhaya. Namo Shakyamuni Bodhaya. Namo Shakyamuni Bodhaya. The unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in hundreds of millions of eons. I now see and receive and uphold it, and I vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning. Namo Shakyamuni Bodha. Namo Shakyamuni. Namo Shakyamuni Bodha. Namo Great Assembly of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Namo Great Assembly of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Namo Great Assembly of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The Buddha speaks the whole Dhamma Sutra. Thus I have heard at one time the Buddha dwelt a Shravasi, garden of the benefactor of orphans and the solitary. Mahamodgadayana had just obtained the sixth penetration, wished to cross over his father and mother to repay their kindness for raising him, thus using his way. He regarded the world had been born among the hungry ghosts, having neither food nor drink. She was but skin and bones. Mahamodgadayana felt deep pity and sadness, filled a bowl with food to provide for his mother. She got the bowl, screened it with her left hand, and with her right fist of food, but before it entered her mouth, it turned into burning coals which could not be eaten. Mahamodgadayana called out and wept sorrowfully to return to the Buddha to set forth all of this. The Buddha said, your mother's offenses are deep and firmly rooted. You alone do not have enough power. Your filial sounds have hit the heaven spirits, the earth spirits, twisted demons, and those outside the way, Brahmins, and the four heavenly king gods are also without sufficient strength. A awesome spiritual power, assembled Sangha of the 10 directions, is necessary for liberation to be attained. I shall now speak a Dharma of rescue, which causes difficulty to leave worry and suffering, and to eradicate obstacles from offenses. The Buddha told Moggallana the 15th day of the 7th month, Vana day, for the assembled Sangha of the 10 directions, for the sake of fathers and mothers of 7 generations past, for fathers and mothers of the present who are in distress. You should prepare an offering of clean basins full of hundreds of flavors, and the 5 fruits and other rings of incense, oil lamps, and those beds and bedding, all of the world to be greatly various. Full Sangha of the 10 directions on the day of the holy assembly, whether in the mountains practicing dhyana samadhi, gaining the 4 fruits of the way, or walking beneath trees, or using the independence of the 6 penetrations to teach and and those enlightened to conditions, or provisionally manifesting as pictures, when in fact they are great bodhisattvas. 10th ground, all complete with pure precepts and ocean-like virtue of the holy way, should gather in a great assembly. Like mind receive the Padavana food, if thus makes offerings to these Padavana Sanghans, once present father and mother, parents of 7 generations past, as well as close relatives will escape from the three paths of suffering, and at the time attain release, their clothing and food will be spontaneously appear. If the parents alive, they will have wealth and blessings for 100 years. Parents of 7 generations past will be born in the heavens, transformationally born, endlessly enter the celestial flower light and experience limitless bliss. At that time the Buddha commanded the assembled Sangha 10 directions to recite mantras and vows for the sake of the donor's family. For parents of 7 generations possessing dhyana concentration, the Sangha accepted the food. When they first received the basin, they placed it before the Buddha. Assembled Sangha had finished the mantras and vows. They received the food. At the time the bhikshu Moggayana in the assembly, bodhisattvas were all extremely delighted, and the sorrowful found of Moggayana's crises. At the time Moggayana's mother, liberation for one kappa of suffering as a hungry ghost. Moggayana addressed the Buddha and said, this disciple's parents, power of the merit and virtue of the triple jewel, because of the awesome spiritual power of the assembled Sangha. If in the future the Buddha's disciple practice filial offering of the Hulambana basins, they will be able to cross over their parents, fathers, and mothers, as well as those of 7 generations past. The Buddha replied, good indeed, I am happy you asked to speak about that, and now you have also asked about it. Good man, if bhikshus, bhikshunis, king, crown princes, great ministers, great officials, cabinet members, 100 ministers, and the tens of thousands of citizens wish to practice filial conduct for the sake of the parents who were for them, as well as for the sake of fathers and mothers of 7 past lives, on the 15th day of the 7th month at Buddha's delight, the day of the Sangha's Paravana, they all should place hundreds of flavors of foods in the Hulambana basins and offer them to the Vana Sangha of the 10 directions. They should vow to cause the length of their present fathers and mothers' lives to reach 100 years without illnesses, without chins or worries, and also vow to cause 7 generations of fathers and mothers to leave the sufferings of the hungry ghosts, to be born among humans and gods, and to have blessings and bless them. The Buddha told all the good men and good women, those disciples of the Buddha who cultivate filial conduct should in thought after thought constantly recall their present fathers and mothers' offerings, as well as the fathers and mothers of 7 lives past, for the sake offerings of the Hulambana basin to the Buddha and the Sangha, and thus repay the loving kindness parents who raised and nourished them. At the time the bhikshu Moggayana in the forum, the assembly of disciples, hearing what the Buddha has said, practice it with delight. Heart of the Prajnaparamita, the Bodhisattva Avalokita, while moving in the deep course of perfect understanding, shed light on the 5 skandhas and found them equally empty. Penetration he overcame ill being. Listen, Shariputra, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is not other than emptiness. Emptiness is not other than form. True with feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Listen, Shariputra, all dharmas are marked with emptiness. They are neither produced, neither default nor immaculate, neither increasing nor decreasing. Therefore in emptiness there is neither form nor feelings, no perceptions or mental formations or consciousness, or tongue or body or mind, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no object of mind, no realms of elements, no interdependent origins, and no extinction of them, no ill-being, no cause of ill-being, no end of ill-being, and no path, no standing, and no attainment. Because there is no attainment, the bodhisattvas grounded in perfect understanding find no obstacles for their minds, having no obstacles themselves forever from illusion and realizing perfect nirvana. All Buddhas in the past, present, and future arrive at full right universal enlightenment. Therefore, one should know that perfect understanding is the highest mantra, the unequaled mantra, the destroyer of ill being, the incorruptible Raha Prajnaparamita should therefore be proclaimed. Gate Gate Para Gate Para Samgate Bodhiswaha Gate Gate Para Gate Para Samgate Bodhiswaha Gate Para Gate Para Samgate Bodhiswaha. We invoke your name, Avalokiteshvara. We aspire to learn your way of listening in order to help relieve the suffering in the world. You know how to listen, to understand. We invoke your name in order to practice listening with all our attention and open-heartedness. We will sit and listen without any prejudice. We will sit judging or reacting. We will sit and listen in order to understand. We will sit and listen so attentively that we will be able to hear what the other person is saying and also what is being left unsaid. Deeply, we already alleviate a great deal of pain and suffering in the other person. We invoke your name, Manjushri. We aspire to learn your way, which is to be still and to look deeply into the heart of things and into the hearts of people. We will look with attention and open-heartedness. We will look with unprejudiced eyes. We will look without judging or reacting. We will look deeply so that we will be able to see and understand the roots of suffering, permanent and selfless nature of all that is. We will look understanding to cut through the bonds of suffering, thus freeing ourselves and other species. We invoke your name, Samanta Bhadra. We aspire to practice your vow, to act with the eyes and heart of compassion, to bring joy to one person in the morning, ease the pain of one person in the afternoon. We know that the happiness of others is our own happiness, and we aspire to practice joy on service. We know that every word, every look, every action, and every smile can bring happiness to others. We know that if we practice wholeheartedly, we come an inexhaustible source of peace and joy for our loved ones and for all species. We invoke your name, Shittigarbha. We earn your way of being present where there is darkness, so we can bring light, hope, relief, and liberation to those places we are determined not to. Those in desperate situations, we will do our best to establish contact with those who cannot find a way out of their suffering, those whose cries for help, justice, equality, and human rights being heard. We know that help can be found in many places on earth. We will do our best not to contribute to creating more hells on earth and to help transform the hells that already exist, in order to realize the qualities of perseverance and stability, so that like the earth we can always be supportive and faithful to those in need. I take refuge in the Buddha, the one who shows me the way in this life. I take refuge in the Dharma, the way of standing and of love. I take refuge in the Sangha, the community lives in harmony and awareness. the Buddha, I clearly see the path of light and beauty in love. Dwelling in the refuge of Dharma, I learn to open many doors on the of transformation. Dwelling in the refuge of Sangha, shining light towards me, keeping my practice free of obstruction. Taking refuge in the Buddha, in myself I aspire to help all people recognize their own awakened nature, realize mind of love. Taking refuge in the Dharma, in myself I aspire to help all people fully master the ways of practice and walk together on the path of liberation. Taking refuge in the Sangha, in myself I aspire to help all people, fourfold communities, to embrace all beings and support their transformation. Reciting the sutras, practicing the way of awareness gives rise to benefits without limit. We vow to share the fruits with all beings. We vow to offer tribute to parents, teachers, friends, and numerous beings who give guidance and support along the path.